Hello, I'm Juliet Parker. I'm the Director of ALNAP, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar on learning emerging from the current Pakistan floods. ALNAP is the active learning network for accountability and performance in humanitarian action, and our role is to support and enable collective learning for improved humanitarian performance across the sector. Our intention with this meeting is to convene a space, bringing together people from across the sector to reflect on critical learning issues in response to requests from a number of our members. ALNAP hosts a variety of learning events and opportunities with different levels and forms of interaction available for online audiences. In this particular webinar, we will first hear from our panelists, and it will be followed by an audience Q&A session. You can pose questions to them as well as chat with fellow participants using the chat function. We will also be live tweeting about this event. Please join the discussion on Twitter by using #Pakistan and #floods. I'd like to thank our co-hosts, the UK HIH and Humanitarian Outcomes, who we are collaborating with in the delivery of this event, for their relevant and timely work in this area. Please do take a look at the Humanitarian Outcomes report, Floods in Pakistan, Rethinking the Humanitarian Role, as well as the ALNAP blog on lessons from the 2022 Pakistan floods response based on learning from the 2010 flood evaluations. These reflection moments are so important to the sector because they offer opportunities for agencies to take stock of the current response, the learning emerging, and shift the overall trajectory of the future response. Every crisis offers us an opportunity to learn and improve, and in a sector that is so skewed towards delivery and response, it is important to protect these reflective moments wherever we can. The Humanitarian Outcomes report has already had a launch event in Pakistan hosted by SPDI last week for people and organisations directly involved in the response. This event today can be seen as a complement to that one, bringing together the global audience to broaden the reflection out across the range of humanitarians engaged in supporting and learning from the country-level experiences. We're delighted to see so many of you here and recognise how difficult it can be, particularly for those of you directly involved in the response, to protect the time to step back and reflect. I'd like to extend my thanks to Jessica Alexander, who has kindly stood in at the last minute to chair the panel, as unfortunately Madame Ramina Khurshid Alam, who was hoping and intending to chair today, was unable to join us. Jessica worked with us on drafting the ALNAP reflection on lessons for this response, and I will pass over to her in a moment. But before I do that, just a few words of housekeeping. For a better webinar experience, we recommend that you select Speaker View on the top right of your Zoom window, as we will be spotlighting different speakers throughout the discussion. At the bottom of the Zoom window, you will see there is a chat option, which will be enabled throughout the webinar. Please feel free to introduce yourself to other participants now as we get started with the event. We welcome engagement from participants in the chat, but we ask that you please keep to the topic of the discussion. For other questions to ALNAP, please do get in touch at events@alnap.org. Captions will be enabled for this webinar. You can turn them on and off at the bottom of the Zoom window too. We will have a live QA function in this webinar, which you can also find at the bottom of the Zoom window. We encourage you to pose questions to each of the panelists throughout the event and upvote your favourite ones. We will roughly have 30 minutes for Q&A after the panel discussion, and the most voted questions will be put to the panel then. And with that, I am delighted to hand you over to Jessica, who will introduce you to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Juliet. And thank you to all of you, our audience, for being with us today, and to our panelists. Before I introduce them, just a few words of background. As we all know, in June of this year, Pakistan experienced unprecedented levels of flooding. The impacts have far exceeded previous disasters, such as the 2010 floods, and there are an estimated 33 million people affected, close to 8 million displaced, and an estimated 30 billion in combined losses and damages. Despite this and the enormity of the disaster, there hasn't been a large-scale international response, and only a fraction of the funding and operational support has been mobilized compared to 2010. So at that time, there were over $3 billion in humanitarian aid contributions. To date, for this flood, there have been under $300 million in grant-based contributions for relief and early recovery activities. And despite being actively engaged, Pakistan's government and civil societies have struggled to mount a large-scale humanitarian response that can address the critical needs that are emerging in this response. So with this background, the panel today aims to explore a number of critical issues. First, around enabling a locally led response and positioning the international sector to add most value, especially as most of the international players had scaled down or left Pakistan before the summer's floods. The disaster has raised questions about the role and efficacy of the international system in middle-income countries like Pakistan. To date, there haven't been any climate financing mechanisms which would meaningfully augment traditional sources of humanitarian funding. And although the humanitarian sector is focused on anticipatory financing models, they've failed to be activated for this response. And similarly, although there has been some investment in disaster risk reduction since the 2010 floods, they weren't sufficient in this disaster. And as risks grow and these kinds of disasters are more likely in the future, these kinds of risk considerations will need to feature more centrally in plans going forward. So as this response unfolds in its current form, the challenge that we're hoping to explore today are really changes that can be made within the existing structures of the humanitarian system to better address some of the perennial challenges that inhibit effectiveness of our collective response. So we have a distinguished group of panelists with us today who will be speaking about these issues. First, I'd love to introduce Paul Harvey, who is a founding partner of Humanitarian Outcomes and co-author of the recent paper, which we'll hear about today, Enabling the Local Response, Emerging Humanitarian Priorities in Ukraine. We also have Dr. Shafkat Munir, who is also a co-author of the report and a research fellow and head of Sustainability and Resilience Program at Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Pakistan. We have Nusrat Nasab, who's the CEO of the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat in Pakistan. We have Bilal Anwar, head of the National Disaster Risk Management Fund in Pakistan, and Sarah Lumsden, who's a humanitarian advisor for the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office based in Islamabad. So before I turn over to the panel, I just want to remind you in the audience that we'll have about 30 minutes for Q&A after the discussion. So please put your questions in the chat and please indicate to whom you'd like to answer the question. So my first question is to the co-authors of the report, and this is to Paul and to Shafkat. As authors of the Humanitarian Outcomes report, you interviewed a wide range of people on the ground who were involved in the response. Can you tell us a bit about what stood out to you most in what you found in those conversations? And Paul, maybe you could start.
Sure. So just a little bit of background about the report. We wrote it with SDPI, and Dr. Shafkat is here from SDPI today. And he can say more about SDPI, but it's one of the world and Pakistan's leading think tanks and based in Islamabad. So they enabled us to have a really rich range of interviews with stakeholders in Pakistan, and we complemented that with interviews remotely from some people from international aid agencies. And we also worked with Geopol, I'm glad to see her on the call, who helped us conduct a phone survey of disaster affected people. And it was through the UK Humanitarian Innovation Hub with funding from FCDO. So that's the report, and I hope you get a chance to have a look at it. I'm just going to make 3 quick points. One about the sort of scale of disaster. It is really big, but that's sort of there in the figures, but reinforcing that a bit. Second, about the sort of impressive local community informal response, and then third, about the limits of the more formal international response. The really big point is just worth stressing. It is an enormous disaster. It affected 33 million people. Nearly 8 million people were displaced. And interviewing people, they kept talking about that. It's just it was so big and so spread out, and therefore you didn't have to get very far off sort of main roads and official camps to find people who are just not being assisted, completely beyond any assistance, or being assisted in very limited ways. And so the coordination challenges are somewhat different. It wasn't so much about sort of fighting over turf. It was about trying to meet these enormous unmet needs and the divisions of labour between that. The second point is around the sort of impressive informal responses, which you often get in disasters, but were particularly impressive here. So there was just an enormous sort of upswelling of local community, volunteer-led, civil society, diaspora, private sector, local philanthropists, all raising money and channeling money to small local organizations who were doing their best to expand and to provide help to people, and all sorts of very, very impressive work at these very local levels. But it's almost inevitably patchy. So that leads me to the third point, that needed to be complemented by sort of big formal assistance. And that had its limits. It had its limits, as Jessica's already talked about, in terms of the funding available, and therefore what sort of international humanitarian actors were able to do. But one of the aspects of it that was impressive was the Humanitarian Income Support Program, the government social protection program, which was able to expand and provide an emergency one-off payment to several million people, with support from the World Bank, who were able to repurpose existing loans. And so one of the striking things for me about the report is essentially that the World Bank was quicker, more flexible, and arguably more effective than international humanitarian actors. And that should be a sort of a cause for alarm on the part of international humanitarian actors. And on that, I'll hand over to Dr. Sam.
Great. Thanks, Paul. That's a really great sort of framing for some of the issues. Shafkat, would you be able to add to that?
Sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Paul, for setting the scene for me to give a few points on that. I think Paul has rightly said that this time the flood was massive, but there was a difference between the two floods if we compare it with 2010. 2010 flood was caused because the water came from north to down south and went into the sea. But this time this does not happen. It was locally generated weather system that caused floods in Balochistan and Sindh. And even the flood water from the Balochistan, from Himal Lake, that also came into Sindh. That's why the massive destruction was there, and still water is on ground. And people suffered a lot because water is staying there with its all bads, including the diseases, including rehabilitation program being suffered, and people being suffered. And after summer, they are entering into winter. So still water is still there. People are still having the same problem because of the nature of the flood, which is different from the north. It was within the south. Secondly, Paul briefly mentioned, but I will just give you an overview of how it was a volunteer and community led. Because in Pakistan this time, as I said, the flood was massive, spread out, and was of a different nature. And even the humanitarian actor, who were few, in terms of if you look at the international humanitarian actor as compared to 2010, and also the response, the preparedness for response was not at for this kind of a massive flood, which is the different. So that's why those who are on ground, the NGOs, local groups, local NGOs, volunteers, who were already on ground, who were not trained for the humanitarian response. For example, some women organizations, some local organizations who were working on HIV/AIDS, health, women and gender issues, education, other health issues, and even local level responses. So these NGOs felt their responsibility because they were from the area and they have seen this massive flood. So they started responding to them from their own resources, and they generated some of the resources from local philanthropists. So this way the response started in these areas. And these areas were hard to reach because of the spread. All the roads were, a massive destruction of roads and infrastructure. And the roads were in water, so there was no way to go there. Two of the big players which I think emerged out of this local response, two big humanitarian organizations. Al-Khidmat Foundation, it is a subsidiary of a political party, religious political party. The other one is Akhwat Foundation, which actually they provide the health and education facilities and small loans to people to come to their livelihoods. But they diverted their resources, and since they have a network among the people, philanthropists, among the industrialists and businesses, so through them, they generated the resources, additional resources they put into place. And then they put up the camps and tents in each city. Every street corner, you could find one relief camp where people donated money, people donated relief goods that were food items, non-food items, medicines, and some of the volunteer groups, for example, the young doctors and others, they set up their medical camps there. So the report and interviews which we have conducted, they testify this local-led response. And some of other political parties also put up this kind of response. One important thing is that there is one voluntary organization, Selani Trust, which provides food across the country, and they were already providing food to the people, the poor people. They diverted their resources, and they have huge capacity of cooking food and distributing food every day. So they chipped into that. So there are a lot of other examples, if you will allow next time. So in next phase, I will discuss. I would not take much time on that. Thank you, Jessica. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shafkat. Great. You're both, Paul and you, Shafkat, have sort of teed up the next question really well, which is around the response being nationally and locally led. Paul spoke about this upswelling of a local response, but that it was patchy. And you spoke about some very specific volunteer and community-led movements for the response. I'd like to turn now to Nusrat Nasab and Bilal Anwar. You two are members of national civil society and a member of the government of Pakistan. Can you tell us a bit about your specific experience and ways that you've seen both the government and Pakistan civil society demonstrate leadership? Tell us a little bit about what the benefits of that have been, but also what the challenges that you've faced in that as well. And I'd like to start with Nusrat, please.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I will speak more about the civil society organization role, and I leave the government part for Bilal. I think civil society organization or communities, they have a key role, to play in any disaster. So first of all, it becomes spontaneous, and then it gets into more organized way of, responding. So what we saw during, this particular flood and why it's different from the past, be it 2010 or even 2015, there was flood together with, earthquake. It was more complex. But the responses might have been different. So here, what we learn is wherever there has been an investment in preparedness, and if there is a mechanism within the society, I think the response becomes really effective because it's based on certain training, it's based on certain assessment and facts, and you reach to many people. But if you just leave it to only just responding, I think what comes at end is some people get more than what they need, and some people get nothing. So that's what I would say it becomes. So really learning from the past, I would say there are communities, there are civil society organization. If I may speak for my organization, the Aghan Development Network, we have footprint on certain areas. For example, in the mountainous region in Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral, we have quite strong, footprint in both humanitarian response as well as the development aspect. Same goes for, the coastal area. If I first start from the coastal area, I think in the health part, being the Akhan University on ground and Akhan Health Service, I think they did a great job in, Sindh reaching at least like 19 districts. And then when we come to the response part in the mountainous region, the issue here is the mountainous region in such a situation when it's a national calamity. I think the mountain regions are usually ignored. So the reason is because the flash flood comes and it goes, so the terrain looks like there is nothing, right? Whereas in the south, the water stands there and people see that. So that's the key part in here. So one thing I must say when I said preparedness is key, and I think there were some mitigation project, my organization and Bilal's organization, I would say we worked together in terms of mitigation, and we saw the impact. It has saved life. People were evacuated earlier, and maybe they lost certain assets, but the lives were saved in those areas. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nusrat. Bilal, can you complement what we just heard from Nusrat from the government perspective?
Yeah, well, certainly, I'll try. Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for giving this opportunity and bringing this, highlighting the scale and the gravity of this disaster to the international audience. I think what Shafkat and Paul actually encompass in their report that basically sets the scene very well, and what Nusrat just mentioned as well. I think there are 2-3 things. I mean, one, Shafkat already said that this particular flood is very different in nature. It's not a riverine flood, and Pakistan have this kind of experiences both from the government side as well as from the civil society side. But this flood generated out of a very heavy, unprecedented rainfalls, and then that basically covered quite a wide spread of the area. So the 3 things, which one is the scale, the gravity, and the geographical spread. I think that got everyone in surprise, including the government, and it wasn't expected. And none of the government institutions were actually were very prepared in the first few weeks when the flood actually hit the people. So in terms of the humanitarian relief, as it happens in any kind of disaster, the very first response is always spontaneous, either from the civil society, and in this regard, civil society, of course, takes the lead, and but at the same time from the government institutional infrastructures as well. And I think the very first kind of a key activity, of course, is just to gauge and evaluate the scale of it, and the impact of it, and the damages part of it. I think it took the government some time to gather their head around and just to be fully aware of it in terms of the impacts, and then go out to the international community for immediate humanitarian relief and assistance. The government tried its best, and I think they were able to reach out to a very widespread of population, but still at the same time, as we are hearing, and we know this from the ground as well, the water is still there. It's receding at an extremely painstakingly low speed in the southern part of the country, and now the people are, of course, exposed to other kind of hazards, the health hazards, and then the rehabilitation, reconstruction work, of course, has to initiate soon. So in terms of the experiences, I think this flood has left many marks, and a kind of a number of things which were previously learned, but they really need to be recalibrated, reconfigured And what we know from a climate change modeling models and the assessment and the studies, that yes, it's first time this kind of flood, God forbidden, it might be happening frequently. And I think whatever the lessons being learned, I think they need to be fully incorporated into the relief efforts. I think the one thing is, just want to mention that, as Nusra said, and Ahuwat and Al-Khidmat and many more actually. I think they need to coordinate with the government, and the both actors and both entities have to work together. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, we'll be touching on that later on in some of the questions, but those were really important points from both of you. And so I'd like to turn now to you, Sarah, because we just heard from Nusrat and from Bilal, and also from Paul and Shifkat about the upswelling of the local response, the civil society engagement, as well as the government. I'd like to hear now a bit about the international perspective. And the Humanitarian Outcomes report in particular talks about the international response being underfunded and undercapacitated. Can you tell us a bit about, from your perspective, why that might be, and what have been some of the implications of that for this response? Over to you, Sarah. Thanks.
I got things flashing up on my screen. So yeah, it is actually the appeal now that was made is actually 30% funded, and though that still seems awful, quite frankly, in the current state of the world, I think that's pretty good going for so far, though it's been slow to get to that point, which I think is a problem. For rapid scale up and for rapid response. So the money has come in quite a lot recently, but that didn't help with the initial response. And the international community is really stretched. Ukraine is everyone's priority, certainly in Europe. We've got Afghanistan, Yemen, Horn of Africa, and this was all on top of COVID. So the coffers are pretty bare, quite honestly. And I also think Pakistan is unfortunately, a bit of a victim of its own success. It's a low middle income country. It's very capable of response, and it was responding extremely well. And I suppose when you're a donor, where do you put your money? Do you put it somewhere with a lot less capacity and wealth, or where do you put it? And you have to make these quite tough decisions as donors. In terms of this response, I also wonder there's a few things that we need to reflect and learn. Hopefully there'll be some sort of review with the UN and the humanitarian community looking a bit more in depth at this. But by the time it really hit the media and these floods really hit, and the appeal was launched from the humanitarian international community, Pakistan the floods had been since mid-June. So actually by the time we had this horrible weekend towards the end of August, where it seemed to rain solidly for about 6 days and caused the pictures that very much got on in the press, I wondered if really Pakistan and local authorities were really completely stretched by that point and had already distributed their supplies. So actually, I wonder whether we assessed it correctly about what was really needed. Then on capacity, I think also just on the amount of money for humanitarian programming in Pakistan is reduced massively recently. So NGOs, UN, donors haven't put money into humanitarian programs. And I also think a lot of the experience of Pakistani staff are now overseas. So in order to launch that response, were there enough staff in country at that time to really launch a good response rapidly, which is also worth thinking about, just to reflect on. And hopefully some of them have come back to support their country.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I mean, I think you really put it well about the sort of trade-offs and competing priorities within the humanitarian system at this time, with so many needs all over, and many donors, but also organizations struggling to prioritize these competing priorities. But also the issue of, you know, the late launch of the response and the tie to, you know, the low media attention as well. I want to turn back to Nusrat now to just build a bit on Sarah's response. You know, and she just mentioned some of the constraints and challenges of the international actors. And, you know, to quote the Humanitarian Outcomes report, which says, the humanitarian system appears to have largely abdicated its role rather than adapting it. Do you think that's fair? What do you see as the international sector maybe doing differently, and what would be the most effective role for them to take on in this, at this point in the response and in future responses, given all the limitations that we just heard about, and, you know, what you had said in your earlier response as well?
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I sort of agree with, you know, what has come on the table from Sarah. I think the key part, or the key thing to mention here is, when a government, when, you know, it announces it's a national calamity, and then I think there is a role for the international organizations to play. So what we saw here is it was devastating. The need was so high, but, you know, the response was very disappointing. We wanted to do work in certain areas, but due to funding, for example, due to the limited resources, we were unable to reach there. So this is the type of, I would say, issues which you know, come across. And then there were some reallocation of certain resources within, let's say, from the development side to the humanitarian side. So one thing is for sure, one is like how this is addressed systematically in terms of especially the coordination part, and not only the flood. See, the nation, it's a resilient nation for sure, but, you know, it was going through a price hike. Like, there was inflation also. So then, you know, the purchasing capacity, even those who were not affected, they could have contributed more, although they have done. But I think for them also, the economy was kind of going through a really tough time. So I would say this particular part, when Pakistan comes into the most, you know, vulnerable kind of list for climate change, I think it's the responsibility of you know, the most developed countries, or the international organizations in particular, to look into that aspect. For the INGOs, or the international you know, organizations, I think if we look at the past, there were many on ground. But now, if we compare, there are very few. And maybe their core area is not humanitarian response. Maybe they are focusing on, you know, certain projects. So that becomes very difficult, I would say, to, you know, respond to such a scale of organization. And of course, from the Pakistan side, I think we need to more work on how enabling we can, you know, make the environment, how the systems or the NOCs, and, you know, that part is really dealt. So those organizations who would like to contribute, they can come, you know, with that mandate. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the NOCs and making an enabling environment as well, because I know that was a constraint initially as well. I want to turn back now to Shafqat, and also to Sarah, because as Nusrat said, you know, the response was disappointing, you said, and you mentioned that it was due to funding. We weren't able to kind of reach some of those areas. My question is, looking at, you know, going forward with recovery, that the post-disaster needs assessment estimates $30 billion of loss and damage. what do you see as some of the obstacles to generate the financing needed for recovery? And where do you see a role for climate finance? And for Sarah, I also want to mention that we just got a question from the audience about, what needs to be done to draw the attention of the international community for funding. So, you may want to address that as well in your response. But first, Shafkat, if you can answer that about the PDNA and the estimates of 30 billion of loss and damages, and how the financing outlook is for that.
Thank you, Jessica. I think it's a very interesting question. It has three parts. One is about the PDNA. Second is the generating, what are the obstacles in generating finance in recovery, and role that climate finance can do. So one by one, I'll respond to that. As far as the PDNA is concerned, I was also part of the consultation with the Ministry of Planning Commission when this PDMA was designed and was conducted. And now the recovery plan is also in preparation. So I was also part of that. If you look at 30 billion, if we bifurcate it, it says that out of 30.1 billion, which is total, assessment, 14.9 billion is in damages and 15.2 billion is in losses. I think both the figures are huge, but immediately for the rehabilitation, Pakistan needs $16.3 billion. That's a huge amount. Now, what are the problems in post PDMA, and what are the obstacles you said? One is that the international response is not adequate. Pakistan is hoping that when in Geneva, donors conference will be held soon, maybe international community would be responding, because now things have been made realized, not through the UN offices, but Pakistan also at COP27. I was also there, and the government high-level delegation was there, including the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and Environment Minister, where they pleaded Pakistan's case for loss and damages. And because of that, the COP also adopted loss of damages for the first time in 14 years on a regular agenda point, and they agreed to set up the fund. That's a new politics starting now. Fund is announced, but who is going to pay for that? What will be the rules? That will be decided in COP28 in UAE next year. That's one part of it. The second obstacle, which is biggest obstacle, is that the IMF conditionalities to Pakistan, because Pakistan is in the IMF program, and IMF is not allowing Pakistan to spend 40% of its own development funds until the last quarter of the year. That is one of the important figure. And so far, IMF has not given us any kind of waiver or any concession as they did in case of COVID. And, Bilal also mentioned previously on that. That point is important. And now Pakistan has formally submitted to IMF the spending which we have done recently on the flood response so far. It is around 340 billion rupees, which is in terms of pound, if you think, it is 1.22 billion pound, or in terms of dollar, it is 1.51. So if $1.51 billion is spent already on the flood, Pakistan has requested with this, with sharing of this information to IMF, that they should provide us one-time adjuster, so that in the current fiscal year we can make some adjustment in terms of the deficit, taking it to 4.9%. If IMF comes to that, then certainly there will be some leverage for us to spend on the development plan, which include the rehabilitation. And taking from here, we can also enter into the next year, and next year's budget would also reflect some sort of a funding from within the budget to spend on the recovery plan, which Pakistan is now finalizing. So these are the barriers which are an obstacle in creating or generating more fund for that. Climate finance, as far as the climate finance is concerned, until now, there is no climate financing facility that can directly feed to humanitarian actions, because humanitarian action is huge. The climate fund is already set aside for certain other elements. Now we have hope that with the new fund, which is loss and damage fund, maybe if from next year rules are made and countries who are responsible for the climate disasters, if they agree to pay for it, and only then we can expect that some money can come from that. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Shafkat. Sarah, do you have anything to pick up on from Shafkat's comment and also from the question from the audience as well about financing?
Well, just briefly, I totally agree with what Shafkat said. Pakistan does have quite a few financial issues that it needs to work through, and it's unfortunately some of those issues will have to be solved, or at least come to some sort of conclusion in order to reassure further funding. I mean, the World Bank has already, I think, is allocated a couple of 2 billion, I think, already to some reconstruction activities, and there is a conference being announced on I think it's early January, to try and raise some more money on that. When I was attending an ambassadors meeting this morning, I think the international community are very aware, and they are looking to see what they can do. I think it's very much appreciated, but I think media coverage, it's absolutely desperate. We were seeing some pictures of which is still the floodwaters are so high, and well, it's not, I mean, stuck. The floodwater is stuck. So this and the food security situation. I think the international community is becoming much more aware of the acuteness of the situation that's just not going to improve for the next year. And yeah, I suppose the more that people out there and the more that the media are aware of it, that would really help. So yeah, so getting the media interested. This is such a big continuing crisis. It's not over. Is very important.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that's part of also why we're putting together this panel too, to kind of help raise awareness and heighten the understanding of what the current needs are and going forward. I want to turn a bit to going forward, but also looking back. Shafkat had mentioned in his opening statements that the preparedness was not great. Nusrat had mentioned too that preparedness is key, and that there were some visible impacts of some of the mitigation projects that had been put in place prior to the floods. That people were evacuated earlier, and that they may have lost assets, but that these measures did save lives. Are there any other lessons when you think about risk reduction and preparedness investments, and given the scale and the response to this disaster, what improvements or changes need to be made to these kind of investments going forward? I'd like to put that one to you, Bilal, for the government, if you can address that.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Several valid points actually been made and highlighted. Well, I think with respect to the preparedness, yes, there's always, after every disaster, I think we all are left with a kind of understanding and impression that a lot more should have been done, a lot more could have been done. And I think this is the lesson from this kind of flood as well, that preparedness is the key. I mean, no one is denying that. I think this whole science have evolved, and then this is very much noted. Now, I think what is more important is, which of course is not undermining the role and the importance of the preparedness, is the risk reduction. That's what you mentioned, and of course the government of Pakistan has been trying extremely hard. I mean, my own institution, National Disaster Risk Management Fund, is mandated to do so, and we've been actually putting together a lot of projects in several parts of the country, especially those which are most vulnerable and which are normally and traditionally being hit by these kind of floods. And we put a lot of flood protections, rescue services, and a number of those kind of measures into place. But several more. We have a very big and rich portfolio for flood protection measures up and down the country, which actually came forward, and we were actually working towards implementing, mobilizing financing for that. I think while it highlights and raises the importance of preparedness, it also raises the importance of the risk reduction component of it. And I wouldn't say that the government wasn't really aware of it, or there was any kind of a less importance of it, but I think it comes down to the availability of the resources. Climate finance does not traditionally really become a big component of it or a contributor towards it, because most of the climate finance internationally available, it is project-based financing. So a project has to be mobilized, has to be raised, and then it has to be compete internationally to come through it. So I think the one particular area I think is the risk reduction across the board, not only by flood protection measures, but also from the kind of nature-based solutions, training for the people, as well as the disaster risk financing, because financially is almost impossible for any government, and particularly the government of Pakistan, to actually come forward each time and then bear the damages, bear the financial losses, because that kind of financial and fiscal space is just not there, and that has to be compensated through other means and other financial instruments, which has been tested around the world. So we are working on disaster risk financing strategy for the government of Pakistan, and we will be actually coming forward with some kind of financial instrument through risk transfer measures. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Sarah, did you have anything to add on that?
Well, I think there are some clearly things have massively improved since 2010. So clearly there was a lot of work done. I think obviously this disaster was a lot bigger, and also when you talk about flood defences, but a lot of areas were flooded from non-riverine flooding. So there is a need to sort of review what the risks are per district. I remember one district commissioner said, well, I just didn't know who to contact, but he probably wasn't highlighted as a risky district. Therefore, perhaps he wasn't part of any response mechanisms. And so that I suppose there's a lot of review. I mean, I haven't been to Pakistan for 6 to 9 months or so I don't know exactly what the ins and outs of all the risk work that was done, but it would be really useful to go and evaluate work that was undertaken post 2010 to really see what's worked and what hasn't worked. I think that would be a good exercise to do, so we can see where everyone can learn from.
Well, Juliet is listening from ALNAP, and you know, I think that is part of the role of ALNAP. So I mean, I think, yeah, as well, this idea of learning from the past and thinking about, you know, what was applicable in this response, and also acknowledging that going forward, you know, there will be more and probably more intense disasters like this. And so, you know, understanding what worked and what didn't is critical. I had planned on a couple of other questions, but we've had a number of really great questions from the audience, and some of them are similar to what I had put in, what we had planned on discussing anyway, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to hear from, you know, the audience. So first I want to say that first one, well, I'll read the question and then we can I can see who would like to respond. But the 2010 response, as well as the initial response, was locally led. However, as Shafkat had said, there was a lot more international response as well, but one issue that arose was that early recovery actions, which people wanted, were late during 2010. Can you talk about how this has been this time around? And similarly, given that the World Bank has been more proactive in 2022, is the government leading on the early recovery? Maybe Shafkat, if you could take that one, and then Bilal as well, since there's a question for the government on leading in early recovery.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, early recovery is the more top priority area now in Pakistan since the PDNA and the recovery plan, which is now in final stages to be announced soon. I just want to add here that it is not that our resilience and our community's resilience and preparedness was that bad. Since 2010, a lot of investment were made by the government and also by other actors who are, for example, NDMAs, PDMAs. They were doing a lot of work, and World Bank, Asian Development Bank also put some money on that. But the issue is that after COVID and Pakistan's multiple economic crisis, the resilience of people has receded. And because of the risk, which were Bilal and others were just talking about, the increased risk because of the climate change, increased risk and receding resilience of communities in Pakistan, that actually made it difficult for us this time to respond in a way that was required to be for the 2022 floods. For the early recovery, plannings are there. Again, the issue is that money is not committed at that level. For example, in 2010, over $3 billion were committed and disbursed. And what is disbursed now, until now, is around, less than, as you also mentioned, less than 300 million, which is not, even this amount is 100 million less than the 2021. Last year's, money which came to Pakistan for humanitarian activities or humanitarian responses, or be that COVID and other related things. So if money is not coming, because this time we need to rebuild houses and rebuild in a sense, building future better, because this time this flood has ruined a lot of cities. As Sarah also mentioned, district after district, city after city. It was not a rural flood. It was a flood that hit our cities. That's why urban risk resilience, urban planning should be risk sensitive. These are the areas which also question the expanding cities as well. The cities are expanding beyond its limits, and that are not even risk sensitive. For example, even in Islamabad, 2 years back, we have seen last year have seen a flash flood. Islamabad is a well-settled city, capital, but still, because the unsettled, the areas which were on the flow of the water, construction were done, illegally, unauthorizedly, or manipulating the housing rules and procedures. So if these things would come up and there would not be risk-sensitive urban development, then certainly this will not remain to be a rural issue. The flooding would be larger urban issue as well. So for recovery plan, we have to see both in terms of rural and urban sensitivities. Yes, thank you, Jessica.
Great, thanks, Shafkat. Bilal, do you want to take the part to the government?
Yeah, well, I think Shafkat already mentioned. So recovery, of course, is now once the relief part is passed. Recovery is the critical component of it, and but I think the missing link so far has been the availability of the adequate resources, the financial resources, which has not been made available to the government. I think recovery become even more important and critical because we are already in the winter season now, and the people, of course, need to get back to under their roofs, and so they can start rebuilding their life as well. But I think as you know, this whole recovery recovery, I think one thing is just kind of, letting people and kind of facilitating and supporting them to go back to their old places of living. And the other, of course, is having them provided them the kind of infrastructure, the living infrastructure, which is sustainable, which is risk averse, and which can be designed in a way that they're not really adversely affected for the next disaster. That makes the whole thing very, very complicated, and I think it's all subject to the assistance, technical assistance from international community, as well as the financial resources.
Yeah, thank you. I want to turn now to Paul. We haven't heard from you much. We've been focusing on our colleagues in Pakistan, but there's a question directed to you about cash, and specifically what the benefits and challenges of the provision of a cash-based response this time with regards to meeting needs and in terms of access to markets. You talked in your opening a bit about the social protection being really critical, but can you talk a bit more about the cash-based response and some?
Yeah, sure. With limits in terms of my knowledge, but I think there's a question from Justin. Justin, you also said you might be looking at sort of lessons from 2010. If you do that, do talk to Lewis Cedar. He's one of the co-authors of the report who did a big evaluation of the 2010 floods and would be useful to talk to. On the cash response, yeah, so I mean, by far the biggest cash response has been through the Benazir Income Support Program. So as a form of sort of shock responsive social protection, and was enabled in part by the World Bank being flexible and repurposing existing loan to enable around 300 million worth of funding to provide a one-off emergency cash transfer to several million people. And then in addition to that, obviously the government has been able to use its own resources to augment that and to continue its existing social protection payments. In comparison to that, everything else is fairly small scale in terms of humanitarian cash responses. And that, I guess 2 points about that. One is that was really useful and quite quick, but it was one-off. It was a one-off payment of about $115. And so there's a big question over, what's needed beyond that. And obviously part of what's needed beyond that ideally is a series of payments. A one-off payment of $100 is nice to have, but doesn't help you through the winter and doesn't help you rebuild your house. And so where the money that is going to come from is a real problem, and that gets you back to all the scale problems we've been talking about. The humanitarian response is very small in comparison to the huge needs and the huge scale of the disaster, and so it's always going to have limits. And what's really needed is negotiations with the IMF on a pause on debt repayments to free up billions of dollars worth of government financing that can deliver social protection at scale. And then just while I've got the floor, I guess a couple of sort of responses to other questions. As a panel, there's a danger we're all overly polite, and so I'll stop being polite. So I mean, if you look at donor financing, it's important to stress just how fundamentally inadequate it is, and to say, for instance, the UK government's financing this year compared to the 2010 floods is orders of magnitude smaller. That's to do with political choices. It's to do with aid cuts. It's to do with choosing to spend the large chunk of the aid budget domestically on Ukrainian refugees in the UK through the Home Office, and so there are fewer resources. But that's that's not a good answer. And you can also be overly polite to the government. Part of the reason for reduced international humanitarian capacities is that the government of Pakistan had an increasingly restrictive environment for civil society, asked several international NGOs to leave in 2017-18, so they weren't there. And there's comments in the Q&A and the comment box note, the civil society crackdown is a problem in terms of enabling, access and humanitarian capacities for response. And it's also possible to be sort of overly polite to humanitarians who are arguably sort of too slow, too cumbersome, and not adapting enough to localized responses in the context of a middle-income country or a rich civil society response. So I think, if you look at the challenges, for instance, of the Femrise in her comments and Q&A around, also, other aspects of the government response, we need to be careful not to be too sort of nice to each other in the panel.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So a call to be a bit more maybe honest or about the other actors who are in on the panel, but There's another question now for Nusrat, as well as to you, Paul, but I'm gonna turn to Nusrat. That one of the audience members said that the World Bank came on fairly early on compared to other major disasters. And for a middle-income country like Pakistan is a low priority for humanitarian donors. Is this a system, I guess using the World Bank and other IFIs, that one could consider as a potential strategy in the future for finding funding?
Thank you, Jessica. It's an important question. I would say, of course, like the development partners have, certain commitment and priorities. So Pakistan being, frequently it becomes on the radar of certain, I would say, disasters. So I think going forward, not only the development partners like World Bank, but also the country itself, I think we have great plans, we have policies, but we really need to invest in people. And when I say invest in people, it's more about like not only the skilled part or that, but it's also behavioral. Why we should, kind of construct something in the path of water. So then it leads to the institutional setup that we have law, we have policies, but how much that is, kind of endorsed and how much that is regularized. So that there is something which brings us to habitat plan and then zoning, like land use planning. So these are the things I would say which going forward is going to help. The recovery, I have a comment on that. That there might be a very good plan, but and I'm optimistic about it, but my fear is this time the recovery period, although it's mentioned a few months to a year or so, this is going to take much more time. Because we have not come out of the previous, I would say, disasters yet. And then, another one is coming and who knows in the future what happens. So I would say those partners who are keen to help the country, we have to make it more systematic in terms of, and it requires a consistent, kind of investment, because it can't be one time. And it will take a bit longer for us to come out of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nusrat. Paul, did you want to come in at all about the World Bank and other IFIs? You're on mute.
Just very briefly, because I had the floor too long. In the World Bank, it was important. One of the interesting things about its ability to respond was in part down to a sort of a 10, 15-year program of working with the Benazir Income Support Program and the government to support capacities and the ability to deliver social protection. So you're only able to be responsive because of the long-term investment and the lessons from that.
Okay, there's another question which
Jessica, I would like to add some point here.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see your hand there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. On the point of middle income model, I guess no doubt Pakistan is the middle income countries, and based on that yardstick, if international communities looking at that behind is not the real answer, because if you look at the post COVID situation and now with the flood situation, almost 4% people are more into the into poverty trap, and that counts around 9 million people. So 9 million people going into poverty, and poverty is surging by 4%. Now other indicators say that we are lower middle income country, but still other indicators, which is poverty, people in still flood water, there are a lot of other things which require a special attention. That's why again I would like to re-emphasize here that when the donors are meeting in Geneva soon, they should not look with this middle income model. Rather, they should look at realities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important point that, regardless of the status, what is the middle income status, what is the actual situation on the ground, and that's how they should be judging the financing. I have a question now about the deforestation, urbanization, and issues of, I guess, risk reduction. And this one is a bit more punchy, Paul, so it's not as polite or soft. And maybe I'll put this to Bilal first, and then others can chime in if you have a reaction. But this question says, aside from the nature and scale of the disaster, the Pakistan government has barely invested in flood and disaster protection after 2010. There's also been rampant deforestation, urbanization, and mechanization that has sped up the disaster. This could have prevented some level of the scale of 2022. The government didn't acknowledge the existence of the flash floods in Baluchistan until they were at their peak in other provinces. And this is more focus of the political power it plays in Islamabad. So the question is, after 12 years, if we don't even have an evacuation mechanism in place, how can we claim to be taken by surprise? So Bilal, could you start us off with responding to that one?
Yeah, I'll certainly try. And well, first of all, I don't think it's entirely correct that since 2010 floods, not much investment has been done by the government of Pakistan. If you look at the institutional side, a number of new institutions were actually erected out of the 2010 flood, and similarly, a number of action plans, a number of disaster reduction schemes and infrastructures were put into place. So I think this is not, yes, I mean the question is, a lot could have been done. Yes, of course. I think every disaster in any corner of the world, I think we're left with these kind of questions, and there is always more to do. Now, I think deforestation, the kind of interlinkage between the deforestation and the climate change, yes, no one can deny it. And of course, I'm not going to really deny that the Pakistan has not suffered with the very fast rate of deforestation. But at the same time, Pakistan has been actually taking a number of very bold steps, and a billion tree tsunami being the one globally recognized. And similarly, I think the provinces have also undertaken a number of measures, not only to stop the deforestation, but also to increase the forest cover, and also to improve the forestry sector in general. I think in the last 10 years or so, deforestation or the urbanization and all these measures, they always contribute towards any kind of disaster, both in terms of the recoveries and the reconstruction and rehabilitation. But I think we're talking about climate change, and this is very well established now that this particular flood was triggered out of a climate change phenomena. So we're talking about over a very long period of time. So this is basically the result of a lot of things and a lot of emissions which were basically emitting, and which were accumulating up into the atmosphere. And then Pakistan happened to be in that kind of a topographical range where it is at the forefront of it. So I think we cannot really assess and judge and evaluate in a short span of time. But I recognize that this is moving forward. I think while we need to do stop the deforestation and all those other contributors of the disasters, I think also the disaster risk reduction structures and those kind of measures need to be measured up as well. They need to be scaled up as well. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to come in on that question? Paul? You're on mute.
My computer thinks I've demuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There's a risk of sort of projectizing disaster risk reduction. So, I mean, in a sense that the question and the answer can talk past each other. So, there have clearly been lots and lots of sort of disaster risk reduction projects over the last 10 years. But at the same time, I think there's also sort of problematic governance in terms of sort of things like building regulations and planning and how urbanization is happening. And so there needs to be a more attention to, I guess, the sort of the risk resilience of sort of everyday governance and how building and urbanization happens, as well as disaster risk reduction projects, because projects are always going to have their limitations in terms of scale.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Jessica.
Yes. Shakti.
Yes, on the DRR, I think things are moving now. Pakistan is, the government of Pakistan is now working on midterm review of the Sendai framework. I am conducting that review with the help of a National Disaster Management Authority. And, when we look at the action we have done so far, as I earlier said, were quite good, but now they have reversed. That's the point now. When I am looking at the review question of the Sendai framework, now I find that there should be new things to do, and new thinking should be built on the building future better instead of building back better. And Pakistan DRR policy needs to be reviewed, not in line with Hugo framework, which is still under that. It would be certainly a revised policy under the Sendai framework. So I think, and based on the experience of 2020 floods also, that would also be reflected in the new policy. We hope that would be catering to the next 10 years plans. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to turn now to a question, or two questions really, around other sources of financing. So we've talked about the World Bank and IFIs, but there were two questions around Islamic social financing playing a pivotal role in the recovery from the floods, and what challenges this might entail, and also calls for the international diaspora community to support the response, and a question around how they contributed and what the impact of that was. I don't know, Sarah, since you're close to financing, whether you have any insight on either of those sources of funding, either the diaspora or Islamic social financing, and how what the impact of those were, and also challenges for anyone else?
Well, I can, yes, so on the Islamic social financing, well, I'm not an expert. I don't have very much knowledge about how that works, but I can see that the Pakistan population raised a huge amount of money. I think we need to be, certainly from my observation, we need to be a bit better at trying to work out what that money is, where it's going, helping districts understand where the money went so that we can target people better. So if we know that certain communities are being targeted, then the aid from government can better target those in need. And I think the diaspora definitely was tapped into. I mean, in the UK, the DC's raised 42 million. And I think the government, the Prime Minister had a fund here, and various other politicians had funds. And I know a lot of NGOs were trying to tap into their diaspora. So I think that's been pretty strong. I think the issue is going forward is that we've still got humanitarian needs and reconstruction needs, and whether there is some way of tapping into those resources a bit better in the sort of mid to long term, and just to keep that going, because I think people are really generous, and given the lack of other money or obvious giving about extra money, maybe that's something we need to organise. I mean, yeah, that would be my response.
I don't know if you have anything to add on that, whether you were using any financing from either of these sources, and you know, what the impact of those contributions were for your programming. Nusrat?
Oh, it was for me. Well, before coming to this point, I wanted to mention one thing on the DRR aspect. One is, we know that there are people who live in the risky area. So whatever DRR interventions you do, maybe you are not gonna significantly reduce the risk. So the only option becomes relocation. So I think on this particular part in Pakistan, there are many pockets, especially in the rural areas and in the mountainous region in particular. People live in the risky area, so there should be, a policy, and together with the community, I think that is one way to really reduce the risk, if not eliminate the risk. On this financial part, and specific to, let's say, the Islamic system, I build it on there are safety nets within the communities, and that is where this notion and this concept is coming. So I think all the banks are also going into that direction. So I would really see that it has to be linked with certain let's say segment of the society where it's poor, as well as they are going through various shocks. So that could be one part, because I think the government, one particular thing which we should highlight is the cash money which was provided, although it was timely maybe, but it was not sufficient. It was maybe it needed more. That is a different question, but at least like people got that unconditional kind of cash, and whatever their priority was, I think they used it. So this is how we can link that particular part. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask another question around for.
Can I add on this question?
Please, please.
Yeah, both on the funding with the religious feelings and with diaspora. If you look at the religious point of view, as the report also said, we have mentioned through our interviews in the report, which we are discussing today, that a lot of people, those have the religious based or faith-based organization locally, they generated a lot of funds and they provided local relief. More of it, if you look at the diaspora, Sarah rightly mentioned, diaspora supported in UK DC funding. Most of the funding came through two big organizations, UK based, which is Muslim Aid and Islamic Relief. That also shows a kind of a inclination of people toward these organizations. Maybe it's wrong or right, but I think precisely adding to this question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bilal. I think we have time for one other question. And this one was to really anyone. But apart from an overload of world disasters and a stretched humanitarian system, we hear that a lot in policy circles. This audience member would argue that the needed increase in assistance to the Pakistan flood and relief and recovery and future development phases is partly contingent upon a less restrictive environment for international NGOs, even in partnership with local NGOs. So the question is, what did Pakistani civil society and government entities do to enable international partners to operate alongside their local implementers in response? And how did you lobby the government of Pakistan to allow for greater levels of in-country operability? Would a less restrictive environment potentially result in greater levels of funding pledges to the benefit of the flood-affected population? Bilal, can you kick us off and respond to that? And then maybe Sarah, if you want to speak to international partners operating alongside local implementers, and Nusrat as well, if you have something to add.
Sorry, you asked me, yeah, Jessica?
Yes, if you could. This question was directed to the government.
Yeah, well, international community and especially the civil society has been very, very active. And what we have seen is a lot of the organizations who are actually working in Pakistan in other areas, but at a low scale manner. Actually, they were able to very, very quickly. They were able to scale up their operations, and they were able to mobilize additional resources from their own resources, and then being on the ground and being on the supporting the people. I'm not too sure actually that what kind of restrictions or limitations the international NGOs face when actually working in Pakistan. And I think somebody from the civil society should actually elaborate and highlight this a little more. I know that a few years ago there was some kind of a challenges, some limitation restrictions which were imposed, but I think right now it's a pretty kind of a level playing field. It's pretty open, and the government is facilitating all those different organizations. I mean, we in our own organization, we are actually in the initial phase, we were just working with the Pakistan-based non-governmental actors in terms of implementation of our projects. Nusrat is there, our Khan Foundation is being one, Islamic Relief, and Muslim Hands and Muslim Aids, others who have done a tremendous work in DRR for us. And now we are opening up to, in the next phase, we are opening up to other international organizations as well, and we are partnering with them as well. So I mean, I don't see any restriction, but I'm sure that there will be some limitation. But I think it's good to address this question.
Yeah, Nusrat, do you have anything to add on that?
I just want to add that not particular to the Khan Development Network, we faced certain, I would say, issue, but because I am a member of the Pakistan Humanitarian Forum, and there were certain organizations, they were saying that initially, especially those who were on ground already with some project, they didn't face that much issue, but those who wanted to come, it took them a certain time to go through it. But many appreciated, especially certain government initiative for the quick turn on any NOC. My issue here is not really what I wanted to say is, even within the international organization, there seems not that much coordination which it should be. It seems like people are competing with each other. So in a humanitarian situation, I would say, like, if there is a well coordinated way of response, I think it will be really effective. If one organization is working in a certain area, I think there is room for the other organization to go to another area, and that could only be done if we collaborate with the government and kind of prioritize certain need based on assessment. Not really on, let's say somebody's will. It's pure on assessments and actual need. And the needs are, I think, given. It is, of course, like whenever there is a disaster, there are initial, immediate needs, and then the recovery and rehab need. One more thing is Pakistan will face a problem because it's an agriculture, like major part of the economy. It comes from the agriculture part. So many people who wanted to do for the next crop, I think maybe the quality seed and the other inputs, maybe they didn't find it. So that's gonna add another layer of, I would say, crisis for the country in terms of price hike again, maybe, or something else. So that's what I can say, that yes, in the past INGOs were very, very active. But right now, of course, like there should be, the country has, check and balance that's good for the country. And I think everybody has to, go through this compliance processes and follow the law. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Nusrat, I think you've gotten the last word in. We're going to have to wrap up now. I feel like we could have talked for much longer, and these were all really excellent contributions from all of you and some varied perspectives. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for these inputs, and thank you also to the audience who gave such a really rich questions and comments in the chat. I just, a few points that came up for me as I was listening to you. We heard a lot of positive examples of learning and progress in this response. But I think, you know, there was this ability or willingness to learn the lessons isn't the only detriment to improvement. And going forward, we need a mechanism and funding and the right actors to be involved, especially as more frequent climatic crises and the ability of the humanitarian sector to learn and improve will be really critical. And this links to Shafqat's point that, you know, humanitarian responses really should be determined by humanitarian need and not by the country's economic status. And, you know, whether disasters like this one may be sitting at some of the edge or the outside of the parameters of the humanitarian sector. And if this is perhaps a good model for the future and what, you know, the potential costs and implications are for affected people. And certainly there are other priorities. Sarah spoke to the challenge of juggling those competing priorities. For the donor community, there's a strong government in Pakistan, development actors we've heard stepping up, and, you know, these issues of resilience and preparedness often, you know, fall into sort of the long-term priorities, and this, you know, never-ending discussion on the nexus and the junction between humanitarian and development mandates is really, you know, coming to the fore here. And, you know, again, we heard a lot about local capacity and so much of the early response being led by, you know, local actors. And again, this reinforces the need for the sector, as we know, to look outside itself and for the system to acknowledge informal humanitarians, including the diaspora, groups like Islamic funding. And I think, you know, we've talked about this for a while. I mean, certainly since the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, but really to have humility of the international sector and to identify where it can effectively work with others and to really be looking outside itself. And I think Pakistan and how it proceeds will become a really important learning case for this. So with that, I want to close and thank you again to the panelists and to our audience, and to let you know that there will be a recording of this webinar available on the ALNAP website, and we'll also be sharing it in the ALNAP bulletin next week. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day, wherever you're calling in from. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.